In the early days of the internet, a series of cryptic messages began appearing across Usenet forums. Strings of seemingly random words jumbled together with equally confusing titles. At the time, they were dismissed as meaningless spam and quickly forgotten. But decades later, these obscure posts resurfaced as a perplexing mystery known as Markovian Parallax Denigrate. Touted by some as the first internet mystery, the posts have sparked endless speculation and theories, with many still trying to figure out the true meaning behind them. Yet, what if much of what we think we know about this mystery isn't quite true? What if the real story is even more intriguing than the myths that have grown around it? Today, we'll be taking a closer look at one of the strangest internet mysteries out there, and tell the true story of Markovian Parallax Denigrate. If you do a Google search for Markovian Parallax Denigrate today, you'll see a number of articles and posts that all cover the mystery and give a pretty similar backstory of it. For example, one of the most popular articles on the mystery comes from the Atlas Obscura, who covered it in 2017. In their article, they break down the mystery and give a quick background on it that reads, "Around August 5th, 1996, the date that belongs to one of the only surviving examples of the strange posts, hundreds of odd messages began sliding into discussions across Usenet. They consisted of blocks of seemingly nonsensical strings of words that read like terrible slam poetry. The only thing they shared was an equally meaningless subject line, Markovian Parallax Denigrate. It then goes on to explain that because the messages appeared to be gibberish at the time, almost all of the original posts were lost, but that one survived thanks to Google's archives. This post they refer to here is important, but we'll get into it a bit later, because we first have to address some issues with this article and others like it. Almost all of the coverage you can find on the topic gives this pretty similar backstory of the mystery. The problem is, much of it just isn't true. In reality, none of the series of spam posts shared the same subject line, and there are actually many other original posts that are still around to this day. These are just a few of the many incorrect statements this article and almost all others on the topic make. So why is this? Why does almost all the coverage of this topic get so much incorrect? Well, to understand that, we first need to rewind a bit and tell the true story of Markovian Parallax Denigrate. In August of 1996, users on an early internet forum called Usenet began noticing a series of spam posts that stood out among most. Usenet was an early internet network that allowed users to communicate by posting messages in chronological order within subcommunities known as newsgroups. In total, there were thousands of these newsgroups covering everything from computer discussions to sharing jokes, much like how Reddit has subreddits today. But even in these early days of the internet, newsgroups faced the persistent issue of spam, with most of it being for advertising services or obvious trolling. However, the spam known today as Markovian Parallax Denigrate was different. They weren't trying to promote a service or even seemingly trying to annoy people. Instead, their spam seemed to not have any reasoning behind them at all. The post consisted of random phrases of words jumbled together, without any clear intention behind them. The posts were so random in fact that one of the only indicators that they were even part of the same group was just how strange and obscure they all were. Each had a subject line of 1 to 3 strange words, and the actual content of the posts themselves weren't much different, usually consisting of several lines of random words put together. It's unknown just how many of these posts there were in total, but we know that there were at least thousands, all posted to various groups on the Usenet over the course of a few days in early August 1996. At the time of these posts, however, people mostly just ignored them, as they seemed like they were just some weird spam. They weren't looked at as a coded message or a mystery to be solved, but were rather seen and treated as any ordinary spam would be. In reality, it wasn't until much later that the posts were seen as anything at all. The series of posts weren't really mentioned again all the way until 2004, when a Wikipedia article titled Markovian Parallax Denigrate was made. If you take a look at this same Wikipedia page today, It reads pretty similar to most of the other coverage on the mystery, stating, quote, Markovian Parallax Denigrate is a series of hundreds of messages posted to Usenet in 1996, which all were posted with the subject line, Markovian Parallax Denigrate. We've heard this story before, but if you take a look at the page's edit history, you can actually view the first entry from 2004. And in this first post, it talks about the case in a very different way. The page starts off with a copy of what is often said to be the only remaining post from the spamming that we saw earlier, the one with Markovian Parallax Denigrate in the subject line. The message itself isn't anything too important, as of course it's just random words jumbled together, but the important part of it comes from the Usenet header, not the subject line of Markovian Parallax Denigrate, where the mystery got its name from, but rather the name in the email the spam post was from, Susan Lindauer. That name right there is the only reason this mystery even exists today. You see, a few months before this Wikipedia article was created, a woman named Susan Lindauer made US national news after being arrested on charges of spying for Iraq. The case got quite a bit of attention and speculation at the time, as Lindauer denied the accusations. This Wikipedia article from 2004 is simply a result of someone doing some digging into Susan Lindauer. While doing so, they found the old Usenet post and shared it because of the possibility it could be the same Susan Lindauer. As the article states, after sharing the now infamous post, on August 5th, 1996, hundreds, perhaps even thousands of messages of this type were posted to the Usenet. Most were posted or reposted to news.admin.net-abuse.misc, and most of them consist of thousands of ostensibly random words. While it cannot be determined directly whether this particular message is in fact from the same Susan Lindauer who was arrested on charges of spying for Iraq on March 11, 2004, it might be of interest to fans of cryptanalysis or puzzles in general to try and deduce. So, it seems the only reason the series of spam posts even gained some popularity is because of that name's inclusion, and one individual who decided to make a Wikipedia page about it. As to whether or not the Susan Lindauer in the email of the post is the same one arrested in 2004, we'll save for a bit later, because we first have to figure out how this article about one spam post became the popular internet mystery we know today. Over the years since the original post, the Wikipedia article slowly changed from being about the one post and Lindauer's name being in it to being about the series of spam posts it belonged to as a whole. Eventually, the phrase Markovian Parallax Denigrate became the name for them as a collective, and speculation around what their meaning was started. By the mid-2010s, the internet mysteries genre really took off in popularity, and Markovian Parallax Denigrate grew in popularity with it. Articles, videos, and Reddit posts about the mystery started popping up all over the place. However, with Usenet not really existing by this point, much of this coverage got parts of the story incorrect. Over time, this effect only compounded, which is why finding the true story of the mystery is so difficult now. Today, the Wikipedia article, like most of the coverage on the mystery, is really just about the series of spam posts as a whole, and the only mention of Susan Lindauer in it is that she was mistakenly identified as a possible source of the posts in 2016, even though the entire mystery only exists because of her name being in one of the messages. So, now that we know the true story of Markovian Parallax Denigrate, what actually was the purpose behind these strange posts? Well, thousands have been trying to figure this out for decades, and over those years, countless theories have emerged, ranging from secret government tools to simple spam. But let's start by taking a closer look at the one that started it all, Susan Lindauer and her possible involvement. As we now know, this mystery all began because the name Susan Lindauer was in the email address of the infamous post. The original author of the Wikipedia page for Markovian Parallax Denigrate believed there could be a link between the Susan Lindauer arrested on charges of espionage and the one in the email address of the post. The theory proposes that Susan Lindauer could have been creating these posts that seem completely random to most, but actually contained secret coded messages. Encoding messages in this fashion isn't very uncommon either. It makes it easy for the individual you want to deliver the secret message to find it easily, but is completely unreadable without the decoding key. It's essentially hiding in plain sight, but no one but the intended readers can see it. So, could Susan Lindauer really have been using this method and be responsible for the spam posts as a whole? Well, it's unlikely. According to court documents, it's true that Lindauer was potentially involved in espionage at the time the posts were made, but there really isn't anything connecting her to the messages directly. For starters, it wouldn't make much sense to use an email with your name in it to send secret spy messages. Even if she did though, it would be strange to then go by a different display name of Chris Brokerage. But more importantly, this infamous post is the only one known to use the Susan Lindauer email. Google's Usenet archive doesn't show the poster's email address, but another called usenetarchives.com partially does. Taking a look through them, we can find many of the MPD posts and people discussing them. Every one I could find uses a different email address and display name, meaning the Susan Lindauer email was likely just one of hundreds or thousands used to carry out the spam. Even if the email did belong to the same Susan Lindauer, the way Usenet worked allowed users to post under any email address they wanted, without any verification that it actually belonged to them. In addition, you might have noticed that the email address ends with uwsp.edu, meaning it's linked to a school or university. In this case, it happens to be University of Wisconsin at Stevens Point. In an article from the Daily Dot, they do a deep dive into this email address. In their research, they found a different Susan Lindauer who went to school and graduated there, and even confirmed that this email belonged to her. So, despite the fact that this mystery spawned from the theory the spam posts were encoded messages from Lindauer, it seems like it almost certainly isn't the case. Another popular theory that retains apart from the Lindauer one is that the messages were part of an internet-based number station or other spy communication network. Number stations were traditionally used by spies to send coded messages through public channels like radio. But in modern times, some groups have begun making use of sending heavily encoded messages on public internet spaces, similar to what people believed Susan Lindauer could have been doing. The theory overall is completely plausible, but there are a few reasons I think it's not the most likely answer. For starters, the majority of modern espionage prefers using a secure encrypted channel for communications, as even encoded messages can be compromised. In addition, the fact that none of the posts have ever been decoded or even show any obvious indicators of being encoded in the first place makes this theory seem a lot less plausible. Another popular theory that's quite fascinating is the Markov chain theory. Coming directly from the name of the post themselves, the theory is centered around the mathematical system of a Markov chain, a system that allows calculations of a future state dependent on the current state and independent of past states. The idea overall is a bit confusing at first glance, but when applied to coding, the model is commonly used to generate the next word in text, similar to how predictive text is used today. In fact, one of the most popular uses of this kind of code is in Google search itself. The theory in this case essentially proposes that someone used a Markov chain code to generate all of the text in the spam post. The Daily Dot covered this theory in depth as well, and as they pointed out, the idea isn't that outlandish, as it was actually done before on Usenet itself. In 1984, programmers Rob Pike and Brad Ellis launched a bot named Markovian on the Usenet forum net.singles. Mark, which was named after Markov chains, would go around on the forum and reply to as many people as possible with mostly random but coherent messages. According to Pike, the bot was intended to be a prank and had actually fooled many on the forum at the time. However, there's a big difference between the posts from Markovian and Markovian Parallax Denigrate. The messages from the Markbot, while not always exactly on topic, still had structure and sometimes even made sense. The MPD posts, however, were seemingly completely random strings of uncommon words put together, without any structure or meaning behind them. If the MPD spam posts were truly another case of a Markov chain text generator, the posts likely would have had more structure and would consist of more commonly used words. The biggest issue with this theory, though, is in the name itself. You see, the theory really only gained popularity due to the assertion that all of the spam posts had the subject line Markovian Parallax Denigrate, and that this was hinting at a Markov chain. But we now know this wasn't the case. In fact, taking a look through the archives, it seems like only a handful of them even contain the word Markovian anywhere in them. Therefore, while this theory is quite interesting, it doesn't seem as promising when taking a closer look. But if none of these theories are the answer, then what could be the reason behind the series of spam posts? Although there are still many fringe theories we haven't covered, they seem even less likely to be the answer. And while none of these ideas, including the ones we've already discussed, have been entirely disproven, I believe the real explanation is much simpler. The sad truth behind this entire mystery is that it really shouldn't have even been a mystery to begin with. In reality, this string of spam posts seems to be more similar to an obscure brand of spam than anything else. For starters, the spam posts themselves really weren't too out of the ordinary at the time, as the anonymity and lack of moderation on Usenet allowed for spam to run rampant. If you take a look back at the archives, you can actually see many other similar cases, in addition to people complaining about them as well. Every type of spam post, from advertisements to ASCII art and even gibberish, seemed to be extremely prevalent around the time. The MPD posts were of course more random and nonsensical than most of the spam at the time, but this could have just been a tactic to avoid spam detection and filters. The main thing that set MPD apart from them and made it stand the test of time is really just the inclusion of the name Susan Lindauer in one post. Without that, the Wikipedia page about the infamous post is never made, and the group of them as a whole would have faded into obscurity. And as we now know, the email address in that one post actually belonged to a student and not the Susan Lindauer arrested in 2004. At the time of the posts, at least, they were most definitely seen as spam, as we can tell from the multiple discussions about it. So with that information in mind, where does that leave us? Well, if we go into the assumption that the posts were in fact a case of spam, there is still the mystery of what their purpose was. And while much of the time, spam is done without any reason at all or just to simply annoy people, MPD's case seems slightly more complicated. A few years ago, YouTuber Barely Sociable covered this mystery. In his video, he noticed an interesting similarity between the Usenet groups that the posts were made under. According to posts about the spam at the time, every group except one was related to Christianity. We can confirm that this was the case in this particular chain of spam by taking a look at the archives again. Taking a look through it, there are multiple posts in news.admin.net-abuse.misc and news.admin.net-abuse.announce, covering the MPD spam, or as it was referred to at the time, dictionary spam. In these reports, we can see that almost all of the groups targeted were in fact related to Christianity, with the one exception being the Usenet Abuse newsgroup itself. We can also see that the total number of these spam posts were in the tens of thousands. It's really interesting to go back and take a look at these and see how users worked to delete the messages and speculated around who was behind them. I've gone through thousands of posts from different news groups discussing spam at the time, and they all seem to agree about the groups that were targeted. Some even speculate about the culprit, as there was a spammer at the time who usually targeted similar groups, a user known as Sven. However, there were other theories as well. One idea that was discussed at the time was the spam being part of a calculated move to test or prove whether Usenet admins were implementing filters to auto-cancel posts. At the time, spam was pretty widespread on Usenet, And to combat this, filters started being put in place. If enough posts were made that contained the same sentences or words, they would automatically be removed. With the MPD posts all being essentially random, rarely used words, that idea makes sense, as they would avoid being flagged by those filters. As one user explained while discussing the potential reasons behind the posts, quote, "The second reason seems glaringly apparent to me, to prove that content-based cancels are indeed taking place. For instance, show me one article from the bomb that reaches cancelable thresholds. With this in mind, it seems completely possible that the individual behind the posts were testing to see how the filters work. And sure enough, the MPD posts filled with random uncommon words got past the filters. So, there you have it. Regardless of whether these spam posts were someone trolling Christian news groups, someone testing the spam filters of a site, or even a combination of both, I now understand why it has stood the test of time of internet mysteries. In the early days of the internet, at the infancy of spam filters, someone found a way around them and posted tens of thousands of spam posts that completely differed from most. It was an event that captured the attention of the entire forum. And while most of the information on this mystery out there, even at the time of this video's posting, is completely incorrect, I believe we can now say that this is the true story of the oldest internet mystery. A mystery that never should have been. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video and deep dive, it would mean the world if you considered subscribing or leaving a like, as it really helps a channel like mine out. I would also love to hear what you all think in the comments. Do you agree with my conclusion or think there's still more to this case? Let me know down below, and I'll see you in the next video.